This week we're talking about family violence and child abuse for our assignment, a really important topic that needs to be more talked about, um, as it is often hidden in shame and embarrassment. Domestic violence is present behind closed doors, and it's present a lot more often than anyone realizes. Picture perfect white picket fences can be the most common backdrops to dysfunctional households full of physical and emotional pain. So, what is domestic violence? Well, according to the American Psychological Association Task Force on Violence in the Family, domestic violence is defined as a pattern of abusive behaviors, including a wide range of physical, sexual, and psychological maltreatment used by one person in an intimate relationship against another to gain power unfairly or maintain that person's misuse of power, control, and authority. Who does domestic violence affect? Domestic abuse is often seen as violence or emotional abuse between a husband and a wife, or a parent and a child. But it can be much deeper between many different familial and close relationships. One thing that I never thought of until doing this research is domestic abuse of the elderly. I know it exists, but it never occurred to me in the broader definition of domestic violence. And if you look at it, domestic violence can really be between spouses, boyfriends and girlfriends, between gay and lesbian partners, um, and it can be, as I said, between adult children and elderly parents. There's different theories about the patterns of domestic violence. For example, feminism views domestic abuse in somewhat of a one-sided manner, where women are the victims and males are the perpetrators. The way it is explained is by the view of a patriarchal society. A patriarchy is a social system where men hold all the power. Social learning theory, however, views domestic abuse as a learned behavior. The theory is that the abuser has these preconceived ideas about probable rewards and punishments. Reactions from others are used to develop implicit rules that are then applied to future and similar situations. The abuser learns through direct experience, and the aggressive behavior is adopted as a response to the direct and sometimes indirect experience. Also, being a victim of child abuse can often lead to the child becoming abusive to others later on in life. This phenomenon is called intergenerational transmission of violence, in which the abuser learned through modeling. Social learning theory suggests that a child learns not only how to commit violence, but also learns positive attitudes about violence when she or he sees it rewarded. There are 4 stages of abuse. Period of tension. This is when the tension starts to build, the abuser starts to get angry, communication is breaking down, the victim feels the need to concede to the abuser. Stage 2, the period of acting out. This is when the actual abuse happens, whether it is physical or emotional. Stage 3, the honeymoon period. This is where the abuser starts to apologize. They might beg for forgiveness. They make promises that things will never happen like that again. And sometimes they do blame the victim for provoking the abuse, or they actually deny that anything even happened. And then stage 4 is the period of calmness. The calm period is when the abuse stops. And sometimes, once again, the abuser might act like nothing ever happened. They make promises just like during the honeymoon stage. And victim believes or wants to believe that the abuse is over or that the person might change. But more often than not, I would say always, this cycle begins all over again. So why does the victim stay? A common pattern of domestic abuse, especially this between intimate partners, is that the perpetrator alternates between violent, abusive, and apologetic behavior with apparently heartfelt promises to change, and that the abuser can be very pleasant most of the time. It can be hard to understand why someone you care about would choose to stay in such a bad situation. And some of the other things to consider are things like kids in a family. A lot of people stay for the kids. The promises of change, because the abuse, those who are abused often enough are completely in love, or at least think they are in love with their abuser. So these promises, they seem like something that could potentially happen and get them to a really good stage in the relationship. Sometimes people are scared. They're scared to leave. They're scared of what the abuser will do if they try to leave. Sometimes it's pressure, the pressure of not getting divorced. Someone who is very religious might, have the pressure from the church or temple or whichever, religion they belong to. And sometimes they just don't have a way to get out. If the abuser is the breadwinner and has all the money, or there's only one car in the family, or whatever it is, or they just don't have anywhere to turn. Abuse against children. This topic always hits my heart really hard. I have a 3-year-old daughter. I know how crazy, uncontrollable, annoying, everything you can imagine children can be, especially toddlers. They cry over nothing, they test their limits, and sometimes you just want to scream. But what always helps me center myself is reminding myself that the reason toddlers, and most kids really, act out is because they do not understand some of their own feelings and thoughts. And a lot of the time, they don't know how to express themselves correctly, which ends up in tantrums. What they experience is frustration. My dad told me one time that when I was around 3, he spanked my bottom. He said I was misbehaving and he got frustrated and he spanked my bottom with his hand. Not a belt or spoon or anything, just his hand. Just one time. I, of course, don't remember this. He told me he remembers the mark his hand made on my bottom, and he vowed to never again spank me. I'm grateful for that decision that he made. So here are a few facts from the National Children's Alliance. Nearly 700,000 children are abused in the U.S. annually. That's an insane number. CPS, or Child Protective Services, protects more than 3 million children. The youngest children are the most vulnerable to maltreatment. Neglect is the most common form of maltreatment. About 4 out of 5 abusers are the victim's parents. So what is child maltreatment? Well, there's acts of commission, which are emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, and acts of omission, which are emotional and physical neglect. And the consequences of kids being abused can be quite severe. Many of the consequences of child abuse are long-term, and some don't even manifest themselves until later on in life. There's mental disorders such as depression, bipolar disorders, PTSD. There's physical diseases like cardiovascular disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and even cancer. According to my research, an abuser usually has what they call cluster B personality disorder, which can include antisocial personality, borderline personality, and a narcissistic personality. You have to look out for signs. When you think somebody might be in an abusive situation, you have your physical signs, broken bones, bruises, sprains, emotional signs, substance abuse, overly apologetic, always scared, they lose interest in things. And there's the behavioral signs. Want a lot of privacy, they're always canceling plans, they're isolating themselves. And although a lot of people who are getting abused do feel as though there's nowhere to turn, there are programs out there. In Massachusetts, there's the Domestic Violence Safe Link, Intimate Partner Abuse Education Program, Children Exposed to Domestic Violence. Of course, there's Child Protective Services for kids. And it's very important to depend on other people in our lives, such as doctors, OBGYNs who should have a bigger responsibility of noticing these kind of things, family physicians and pediatricians as well, and of course schools for kids. So this is the conclusion for this presentation. I hope that people get something out of it, and think about this topic in a very serious manner. Thank you.